Hello, everybody. All right. As we wait for more people to show up, I'm going to go off camera here for a moment to take care of a couple of things. While I'm gone, I'll put the music on to entertain you guys. When I get back, we'll go over what's on tap for tonight as we, of course, wait to see more people show up. Anyways, I'll be right back. Let me just go ahead and put the music on. I'll be right back. Alrighty then. All right. So with that, so now we're like just after. So tonight we're gonna do something a little different, as per requested. We're gonna go over the history of Canadian comics. I'm gonna go over the Wikipedia page on Canadian comics, and now we're gonna focus. Of course, since this is an English language channel here, we're going to focus on the English Canada as opposed to French Canada. So, as requested by one of our watchers. Um, so as I said, we're just waiting on a few more people here. See if anybody's going to show up, and we'll get started. Um, so I hope everybody had a good weekend. I hope you guys had a chance to come by and check out the show last night. Of course, you can always watch. I keep them up, so you can go back and watch what we talked about if you want. As always, if you guys can help out by liking, sharing the stream, so we get some more friendly people in here, that'd be appreciated. Also, if anything here grabs your attention, feel free to comment and or ask questions. We'll try to answer the questions to the best of our ability. Let's see, we're now coming up on 5.5 minutes here, so wanted to um, want to give it a little more time, so give some people a chance to come in, certain individuals. All right. So, anyways, I'm just gonna give it a little more time here and see if anybody comes in. Not, we'll just go ahead and get started pretty soon here. Let's see. So, as I said, as per requested by one of our regular watchers, I'm gonna go over the history of um, Canadian comics. Their golden age seems to start back early, a little later than ours did. Their technically golden age of comic book started in 1941, and we'll get into that here in a moment. And we're at quarter, so I guess it's time to pull that up. Excuse me. All right, so let's see. So yeah, we're gonna go ahead and get started here. Golden Age, Canadian Whites, 1940s. We'll look at that main article here in a moment as well. So, the golden age of comic books and subsequent superhero boom began with the release in June of 1938 of Action Comics #1. Of course, that was here in the States. Um, the cover story was the first appearance of Superman, drawn by Toronto-born Joe Shuster. Shuster modeled Superman's metropolis after his memories of Toronto, and the newspaper Clark Kent worked for after the Toronto Daily Star, which he delivered as a child. Yes, and this, if you guys remember, this led to there being Earth 1 or Earth 2 and Earth 2A. And I think Seal and Schuster's Earth was considered Earth 2A or alternative, and what would become known as the Golden Age Earth was Earth 2. So, these comics crossed the border and quickly gained Canadian fans as well. In December 1940, the War Exchange Conservation Act was passed. It restricted the importation of goods from the U.S. that were deemed non-essential in to combat the trade deficit Canada had with its neighbors to the south. American comic books were casualties of the act. So basically, the War Exchange Act was meant. It was in a way. It sounds like it was It was more like a terror. Hey, Metal. I see you here, Elbow Cough. If you haven't already, if you can help by liking and sharing the stream and seeing if we can get some more friendly people in here to watch the show, that'd be appreciated. So with that, as we continue on here, let's see. In 1941, to fill the void, a number of Canadian comic book publishers sprang up starting in March, with Anglo-American Publishing in Toronto and Maple Leaf Publishing in Vancouver. Adrian Dingle's Hillsborough Studios and Bell Features soon joined them. That's kind of ironic. Maple Leaf Publishing was in Vancouver, when usually anything that's associated with the Maple Leaf is usually based out of Toronto. Got Maple Leaf Gardens, the Toronto Maple Leafs, but yet Maple Leaf Publishing was in Vancouver, and they had Anglo-American Publishing in Toronto. So that was kind of interesting. The comics printed by these companies had color covers, but the innards were in black and white, and thus collectors call them Canadian whites. Superhero stories were prominent, and the whites often relied on serials to keep readers coming back for more. Yeah, well, what's kind of funny, that was off. You go back here in the States to 1930, from like 1933 through 1936. They did pretty much the exact same thing here in the States. They pretty much relied more on a serial style storytelling as opposed to episodic, like what would later come to be in late, by the time we're at our historical comic retrospective in 1939 there. So, anyways, as we continue on here, oh yeah, actually I should probably look up what well, they said it here that they had colored covers, but the innards, as collectors called them, Canadian whites. So Canadian whites were World War II era comic books published in Canada that featured colored covers with black and white interiors. Notable characters include Nelvana of the Northern Lights, Johnny Canuck, Brock Windsor, and Canada Jack. The period has been called the Golden Age of Canadian comics, which, of course, time span circa 1941 to 1947. So there we go with that. Some basic information. Better comics from Maple Leaf and Robin Hood and Company from I wonder if this had anything to do with Nador. Maple Leaf Publishing. Oh, this I guess is a different company altogether. Okay. Better Comics was actually one of the titles that was in Maple Leaf Publishing. And Robin Hood and Company from Anglo American were the first titles to hit the stands. Robin Hood was a tabloid-sized comic strip reprint magazine, while Better was made up of original material in traditional comic book format. So they actually had them kind of mix and match already when they started up, whereas here in the States, we kind of went a little slower. We started out with just reprint material and then eventually gradually. But of course, by 1940-41, comic books were becoming pretty popular. So Anyways, continuing on here. And thus can be said to be the first true Canadian comic book. It included the appearance of the first Canadian superhero Vernon Miller's Iron Man, John Stables under the pen name Vernon Miller, Iron Man John Stables under the pen name John St. Abels. Okay. um, oh, wait. Vernon Miller's Iron Man. John Stables, under the pen name John St. Abels, was responsible for Brock Windsor's debut in Better in the spring of 1944, a fantasy adventure set far in the land beyond the mist in the Canadian North. The success of Better led to a proliferation of titles from Maple Leaf. So Canada had their own Iron Man long before Tony Stark. This Iron Man from Canada, created by Vernon Miller, had super strength, indestructibility, and amphibiousness, basically meaning he could breathe both on land and in the water, under the water. So he made his debut in Better Comics #1, March of 1941. Wow, Brock Windsor. Hawk Windsor was a Canadian comic book hero, debuting in Maple Leaf Comics, Better Comics Volume 3, Number 3, April-May of 1944. The character was created, written, and illustrated by John Stables, who was inspired by a Winnipeg adventurer and outdoorsman named Brock Windsor. So, similar name, just change it a little bit. Later in the series, writer Ted Ross and Shirley Fortune assisted in the storytelling. All right. And continuing on to the next paragraph here. See if anybody's here yet. No, we still don't have people here. The driving creative forces behind Anglo-American were Ted McCall, the writer of the Men of the Mounted and Robin Hood strips, and artist Ed Furness. The pair created a number of heroes with such names as Freelance, Purple Rider, Red Rover, and Commander Steel. Anglo-American also published stories based on imported American scripts bought from Fawcett Publications. Fawcett was the company, of course, that where that was the publishing home of the original Captain Marvel in the Marvel family, Bullet Man, Ignis the Invincible, Spy Smasher, Minuteman, Mr. Scarlet, and Pinky. So, with fresh artwork by Canadians to bypass trade restrictions. Captain Marvel and Bullet Man were amongst the characters that had Canadian adaptations. Anglo-American published a large number of titles, including Freelance, Grand Slam, Three Aces. Now, here in the States, we had Three Aces as well. We had a strip Three Aces. It's in Action Comics. So that could have been. But then Three Aces is such a generic term because an ace, as they would have known it back then, was like a aerial ace, an aviator, So a very skilled pilot, basically. Wiz, Captain Marvel, and Atom Smasher, but relied less on serials and was less patriotically Canadian than its rival publishers. It employed a number of talented artists, but they were kept to a, quote, house style, unquote, of drawing, in the vein of Captain Marvel's C.C. Beck. C.C. Beck, the artist on the original Captain Marvel. In August 1941, three unemployed artists, Adrian Dingle and Andre and Renee Kolbach, formed Hillsborough Studios to publish their own work. They started with Triumph Adventure Comics, whose star was Canada's first female superhero, Nelvana of the Northern Lights. So let's see see a little bit of who Nelvana is here. Let's see. Nelvana of the Northern Lights is a Canadian comic book character and the first Canadian national hero, debuting in Hillsborough Studios' Triumph Adventure Comics #1 in August of 1941. She is also one of the first female superheroes, debuting before Wonder Woman, but after Phantoma. After Phantoma, the Golden Age Black Widow, Invisible Scarlet, O'Neill, and others introduced in 1940. Nelvana of the Northern Lights is Canada's first distinctly Canadian female superhero. So there we go. So let's see down here if they have any. So her alter ego is Alana North. Her father was Kolak the Mighty. Tenero was her brother. And her abilities included telepathy, invisibility, travel at light speed, and heat ray. All right. Kind of more of a speedster, and well, I guess she did have a heat ray, so whether that came from her finger. Well, I guess it would. Nelvana, the Northern Lights, heat, like starlight power, basically. Who appeared several months before Wonder Woman did in the U.S. Nelvana was inspired by tribal stories brought back from the Arctic. Group of Seven painter Frantz Johnston. The popular fur mini-skirted superheroine was a powerful Inuit mythological figure, daughter of a mortal woman and Kolyak the Mighty, king of the Northern Lights. She had telepathic powers, was able to ride the Northern Lights at the speed of light, turn invisible, and melt metal. In March 1942, Dingle and most of the Hillsborough staff moved with Nelvana to Toronto-based Bell Features, which had begun publishing comics in September 1941. With the first issue of the successful WOW Comics, WOW, which was another title that was used here in the States as well by Fawcett, by the way. In color at first, but Bell soon switched to the familiar white format. Bell was the most prolific of the Canadian comic book publishers. Its comics were drawn by a large pool of artists, including freelancers, adolescents, and women, and were unabashedly Canadian. Aside from Nelvana, there were Edmund Legault's Dixon of the Mounted, and when they say mounted here, they mean like mounted police. Like the Mountie. He's handsome, he's brave, he's strong. If you guys remember Jacques Rougeau's character in Singles, or WWF at the time. Jerry Lazare's Phantom Rider, and Fred Kelly's Doc Stern. Leo Bockley's Johnny Canuck was the second Canadian national hero, and debuted in Bell's Dime Comics in February 1942, as opposed to Fawcett's Nickel Comics. Interesting, some of these names, how either they just take names of. So Johnny Canuck, the Canadian cartoon hero and superhero who was created as a political cartoon in 1869, it was later reinvented as a Second World War action hero in 1942. The Vancouver Canucks, a professional hockey team in the National Hockey League, currently use a hockey playing Johnny Canuck logo as one of their team logos. In addition, the Vancouver Canucks American Hockey League affiliate, Abbotsford Canucks, use it as the same logo. So my guess is Johnny Canuck is Canada's answer to Uncle Sam. So Johnny Canuck is Canada's answer to Uncle Sam here in the States. That's what I'm guessing. So anyways, we continue on here. Let's see. The new Canadian comics were successful. Bell reached accumulated weekly sales of 100,000 by 1943. By this time, Educational Projects of Montreal had joined selling comics in the white format. Educational specialized in a different sort of fare, biographies of prime ministers. Cases of the Royal Canadian RCMP, which is the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. So obviously sounds like some noir stuff. And historical tales drawn by accomplished artists including George M. Ray and Sid Barron. Educational's Canadian heroes earned endorsements from cabinet ministers and appealed to parents and educators, but were not as appealing to the kids it was aimed at until Ray convinced publisher Harry J. Halperin to allow him to include a fictional character, Canada Jack, a hero who battled Nazis. Canada Jack, Canada's version of Captain America, I take it. At the end of World War II in 1945, Canadian comic book publishing faced competition from American publishers again. Educational and latecomer feature publications folded immediately. Maple Leaf tried to compete by switching to color, and by trying to break into the British market, Anglo-American and another newcomer, Al Rucker Publications, tried to compete directly with the Americans and even achieve distribution in the U.S. Wow, that's interesting. By the end of 1946, it was clear that the remaining publishers could not compete, and for the time being, original comic book publishing came to an end in Canada, although some publishers, like Bell Features, survived by republishing American books until the War Exchange Conservation Act was officially abolished in 1951. Well, 1951 seems to be a year for comic books, doesn't it? So in Canada, they abolished the War Exchange Act in Canada, while here in the States, well, not necessarily in reality, but in the comic book world, in the comic book world of DC, 1951 was also the year that their HUAC had started to go after the superheroes and told them, hey, you have to take off your mask or stop being a superhero. So, the cartoonist who insisted on drawing for a living faced several choices. Some moved across the border to attempt to make it with American publishers, and some moved into illustration work as Jerry Lazare, Vernon Miller, Jack Tremblay, and Harold Bennett did. Another avenue was the route Sid Barron followed into political cartooning. By 1949, out of 176 comic titles on the newsstands, only 23 were Canadian. So in Canada, that is. So, I don't know if that's in Canada or in total, but so before I go on to this next paragraph, I've got to step away for a moment. I'll be right back, but I will put on some music while I'm gone. All right. Anyways, a little mental lapse there. If you haven't already, if you can like and share the stream, see if we can get some more friendly people on here, that'd be great. Also, if anything here grabs your attention, feel free to comment and or ask questions. So, great show. Well, thanks. Considering I decided to do this, you had asked, so Glad to see you're here, JR. I found some of the interesting things I found so far is, Canadians' answer to certain hero, even though, so Nelvana was their answer to Wonder Woman, Nelvana, the Northern Lights. Johnny Canuck was their version of Captain America, and Canada Jack was kind of like their version of Canada Jack was their version of Captain America. Johnny Canuck was their version of Uncle Sam. So I've got homemade chicken enchiladas tonight. Wow, that's got to be a good meal there on their metal. Yeah, I think Dark Horse publishes a modern version of Nelvana. Captain Canuck in the 60s was also Captain America-ish. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I did see that title. And, yeah. So, yeah. So, let's see. Yeah. So. Huh. Yeah, a buddy stayed the weekend and decided to make us dinner before he leaves. Oh, okay. Well, that was cool of him. All right. So, anyways, let's get back to it. So, post-war, late 1940s to early 1970s. With the end of most original Canadian comic book publishing in 1947, Canada's superheroes disappeared, and the company entered a phase of foreign comic book domination. In November 1948, a crime comic scare hit the country when a pair of voracious comic book readers in Dawson Creek, Dawson. Okay, I didn't know that was an actual place. I know I heard of the TV series. And speaking of which, of course, one of the other things that crossed my mind here prior to reading this article, of course, the only other time I've heard of the term Nelvana was the animation company, I think based out of Toronto or something like that, where they had the bear on it, their distributor. Shot at a random car while playing highwayman, fatally wounding a passenger when authorities discovered their taste for comic books. Media attention focused on the emerging crime comics genre as an influence on juvenile so Canada had its issues too. Around the same time that Wortham was doing his studies, Canada was facing some of the same problems and trying to make certain connections between comic books and juvenile delinquency. So it wasn't just an American issue then. And again, just so you know, even though Wortham had some pretty scathing criticisms of the superhero genre, they were, again, it was a lot of what happened with the Comics Code Authority came about more from like the crime and horror genres of comics with all the excessive blood and guts. So, a bill to amend Section 207 of the Criminal Code was drafted and passed unanimously, making it an offense to make, print, publish, distribute, sell, or own, quote, any magazine, periodical, or book which exclusively or substantially comprises matter depicting pictorially the commission of crimes, real or fictitious. Wow. Of course, that wouldn't fly here in the States as much because that is a violation of our First Amendment here in the States. Rick and JR would know more about the Canadian Constitution. I don't know if you have like what we have, a First Amendment or freedom of, have a part of your Constitution that states freedom of speech and all that. But that would not fly here. Going to that level would not fly here. Regulating you could, but not regulating it a little bit more, but not outright banning it like that. So as we continue on here, on December 10th, 1949, comics publishers across Canada banded together to create the Comic Magazine Industry Association of Canada, CMIAC, a Canadian industry self-censoring body similar to the American Comics Code Authority that would be formed a few years later in response to similar crime comic scare in the US. Purely by coincidence, the Netherlands had experienced a near similar comics related incident at almost the exact same time, with an equally lethal outcome and causing a similar popular reaction. But in this case, the authorities refrained from taking the drastic legal actions their Canadian counterparts did. Yeah, I mean the Netherlands and states were their response to the situation was far less drastic than Canada. But we had an unwritten constitution in the 1950s. We brought it and we brought in an Americanish written constitution in the 1980s. So they probably wrote it all down. So you would have still had some of these going throughout the. So as America went from their golden age to silver age comics, Canada was still being restricted in certain ways. Superior publishers, however, defied the ban while also moving into the U.S. market. Watchdogs turned up the heat, and in 1953, a distributor was found guilty of distributing obscenities. Some of Superior's titles found themselves in Frederick Worthen's notorious and influential diatribe on the influence of comics had on juvenile delinquency, Seduction of the Innocent, published in 1954. The United States Senate Subcommittee on Juvenile Delinquency, established in 1953, had public hearings a few months later and called upon Kamloops, British Columbia member of Parliament, E. David Fulton, one of Superior publisher William Zimmerman's most outspoken enemies, as a witness. The Comics Code Authority was soon formed, and Superior, like fellow American publisher EC Comics, saw their sales dwindle throughout 1955. Prosecutions increased throughout Canada, and Superior successfully defending themselves in one, and another supposedly comics-related murder was reported in Westville, Nova Scotia. Superior shut its doors in 1956, and until 1970s, English-Canadian newsstand comic book publishing was no more. Although a number of quote-unquote giveaway comics continued to be produced by Orville Gaines Productions and Owen McCarran's Comic Book World, who produced the educational and cautionary comic for governments and corporations aimed at kids and teens. So basically, Gaines Productions and Comic Book World were where Canada basically sanctioned comics. It's like these are the government controlled comics. A lot of countries wanted a formalized constitution like ours. Most places just had a series of documents throughout history that added together as an unwritten one. Interesting thought process there. Anyways, if you guys haven't yet, if you guys can like and share the stream so we can get some more friendly people on here, that'd be appreciated. Also, if anything grabs your attention, feel free to comment and or ask questions, and I will definitely try to answer them to the best of my ability. Anyways, as we continue on here, the crackdown was not aimed at comic strips, however, and several notable new ones appeared, like Lou Saw's One Up, Winslow Mortimer's Larry Brannon, and Al Beaton's Ookpick. After Jimmy Freese's death in 1948, Juniper Junction was taken over by Doug Wright, quote, one of Canada's best post-war comic strip artists, unquote. He would continue with the strip until 1968, while also working on his own Nipper from 1949. In 1967, Nipper became Doug Wright's family when Wright moved from Montreal to Ontario, and the popular strip continued until 1980. Now, Nipper, I think we got some of those as well here in the States. I think some of the companies like that Will Eisner and his group were working for would bring those in as well. I do remember a Nipper title. So the Doug Wright Awards were inaugurated in his honor in 2005. From 1948 to 1972, James Simpkins' cartoon Jasper the Bear appeared continuously in Maclean's magazine. Jasper was hugely popular across Canada and was used and is still today as a symbol of Jasper National Park. So I guess Jasper the Bear is Canada's answer to Smokey the Bear. Or maybe even Yogi Bear. To express his anger at the U.S. military's nuclear test in Bikini Atoll in 1946, English-born artist Lawrence Hyde produced a wordless novel in 1951 called Southern Cross. In 118 silent pages, the book depicts atomic testing by the U.S. military and its effects Polynesian island inhabitants. While it had no direct effect on comics at the time, it has come to be seen as a precursor to the Canadian graphic novel. Early editorial cartooning lacked a local flavor, tending to be a pale imitation of American examples. It tended to be cheery, non-confrontational, and supported good causes. Following the war, it broke from typical American cliches and took on more of a savage bite, especially compared to the more allegorical tendencies of American editorial cartoons. At Le Devoir, wow, we're already at the 15-minute mark. So I'm going to finish this paragraph, and then I'll continue this tomorrow night. I'll get into like new wave, the 70s, the 80s, 90s. So I'll probably try to finish up tomorrow night. Now, this is a little bit longer than I thought. So we'll finish this portion of the article and then I'll continue this tomorrow night, guys. So just to give you a heads up. I live right near Jasper National Park. Only you can start forest fires. My favorite graphic novel is Canadian. Oh, sweet. Yeah, this is a bit of a longer article, so I figured I might as well. I can split it up. We got started here. I'll continue I'll continue it tomorrow. To probably see about how we do about finishing it. You know, and then of course if we don't finish it up tomorrow, because depending upon how long the 21st century portion of it is, um, we may even continue into Wednesday, but I'll have to wait and see. Anyways, back to the article. Back to the article here. At La Devoir, Robert Lapalme was the first to cartoon in this particularly Canadian idiom, and in 1963 organized an international salon of caricature and cartoon in Montreal. Lapalme was later followed by Duncan McPherson at the Toronto Star, Leonard Norris at the Vancouver Sun, and Ed McNulty at the Montreal Star. So a lot of places like to use the word star, didn't they? Star and Sun up there in Canada. These cartoonists frequently took political positions contrary to those of the papers, which they were published. That must have been an interesting office space. McPherson drew a cartoon of John Diefenbaker as Marie Antoinette saying, quote unquote, let them eat cake, in response to the Prime Minister's canceling the Avro Arrow project, which historian Pierre Burton has called the beginning of Canadians' disillusionment with defeated Diefenbaker's government. McPherson, in particular, fought fiercely for editorial independence, challenging his editors and threatening to quit the Star if not given his way, which paved a new path for other cartoonists to follow. So he stood up. He stood up for himself. For him. In the spring of 1966, saw its first specialty comic shop open its doors to Queen Street West, on Queen Street West, Toronto. Viking Bookshop, established by in smaller quote Captain George Henderson. Entirely unfamiliar with the new phenomena, the store was dubbed, in smaller quote, there can't be a store in town, unquote, by Toronto Star reporter Robert Fulford. No longer in existence, Viking Bookshop is currently the earliest known such specialty comic book store in North America, or worldwide for that matter, predating the oldest known U.S. comic book store, Gary Arlington's San Francisco Comic Book Company, established April 1968, by 2 years. 1 year later, in May 1967, the store was renamed Memory Lane Books, after it had been relocated to Markham Street in the same city, and as such became an inspiration for pioneering retailer Harry Kremer and Bill Johnson to open Now and Then Books in Kitchener, Ontario. So I wonder if Rick goes to Now and Then Books. I'll have to ask him if we hear from him tonight. What is your favorite graphic novel? Slightly unsurprising, it is Scott Pilgrim, which is way better than the movie. Its newsletter, the Now and Then Times, published early works by the young Dave Sim. In its inaugural issue in 1972, later employed him from 1976 to 1977. In the late 1960s, along with the countercultural movement, a new form of comic art appeared from the avant-garde and literary scenes, underground comics, or comics with an X, aimed at an adult audience. So, and those are here in the States as well. Early examples appeared in certain magazines, but an early precursor of Canadian underground comic books was Scraptures, as a special issue of Toronto avant-garde literary magazine Gronk in 1967. Scraptures, as in, I guess, a spin on the word scriptures from the Bible. In 1969, Canada saw its first in 19 saw its first true underground comic, the SFU Comics and Snore Comics. These comics drew their inspiration from the American underground movement that exploded after the release of Robert Crumb's Zap in early 1968. Martin Vaughan James produced an early graphic novel when he had Elephant released by Press Pacific. In 1970, the underground movement paralleled that of the U.S. in that it peaked from 1970 to 1972, with the peak of the counterculture, and witnessed a sharp decline afterwards. Saskatchewan's Dave Geary and Vancouver, British Columbia's Rand Holmes were key figures. Holmes being the creator of the Herald Head comic strip. And we're almost done here. So, humor magazine Fuddle Duddle, named after a famous superhuman by then Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau. I wonder if Pierre Trudeau is related to the current Trudeau. Was a short-lived attempt at a Canadian mad-style satirical magazine. It was the first comic book of Canadian content to be available on newsstands since 1956. Two of its contributors, Peter Evans and Stanley Burnich, would soon go on to bring superheroes back to Canada for the first time since the demise of Nelvana in 1947 with Captain Canuck. Rick lives just south of Kitchener, but it would be easier for him to drive to the larger Toronto Queen Street West area for niche bookstores. Justin Trudeau is the son of Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau's wife after her affair with Castro of Cuba. Castro showed up in Montreal to be a pallbearer of Pierre Trudeau's at his funeral in the 1990s. Ah, okay. So then I guess we can we can actually literally call Justin Trudeau a bastard. He literally is by definition a bastard. I know people probably call him a bastard, more colloquially or jokingly, but with what you just said, JR, he actually literally is a bastard by the actual dictionary definition of the word. Ah. The fan press and fandom grew throughout this period and was bolstered when Patrick Lobert and Michael Hirsch, the founders of the animation company Nelvana, yeah, I talked about that earlier, published of the Great Canadian Comic Books in 1971, a book-length study of the Bell Features comics and the touring of a related exhibition mounted by the National Gallery of Canada Comic Art Traditions in Canada 1941 to 1945, which together served to introduce English Canadian comics creators and fans to their lost heritage. Towards the middle of the 1970s, comics aimed at children gradually disappeared. The new breed of underground alternative and independent comic was aimed at a more mature audience, which ran counter to the public's perception as well as to legal restrictions. The first wave of alternative comics in the 70s was largely made up of science fiction and fantasy comics made by budding cartoonists like Gene Day, Dave Sim, Augustine Fennell, Jim Craig, Ken Stacy, Dean Motter, and Vincent Marchesano. So that's where we're gonna end tonight. We'll continue tomorrow with like New Wave, New Wave, the '90s, and the 21st century there. So we'll do all that tomorrow. Rick just came in. Let's see. Trudeau passed a bill demanding Canadian subsidiaries of American companies ignore the American sanction of Cuba. Canadian firms are still some of the largest foreign investors in Cuba. Yeah, the bastard from the Cuban bastard who runs Canada. That's what we can call him. Hey, Mike and everyone else. Bye, Rick. All right. So, anyways, as I said, we'll continue looking at more of that. Tomorrow, looking at the history there. That was a bit long, so what we're going to do next, we're already past the hour mark here, so I'm going to try to finish up with the wrestling wrap up and this day in each history pretty quickly here. Let's see. So what did I? Oh yeah. So of course, this past Saturday, the WWE had its SummerSlam event from Ford Field in Detroit. Look at that real quick here. So this year's SummerSlam saw in the opening match, Logan Paul defeated Ricochet, in which Logan Paul got some help from his brother, handing him handing him a foreign object to nail Ricochet with. Cody Rhodes defeated Brock Lesnar with the Chimera Lock, and in that as well, they shared a mutual moment of respect for each other as Brock hugged him, and it was believed to be unscripted, that it wasn't supposed to go that way, which is a possible sign that Brock may be, even though Brock is going to be stepping away for a little while, when he comes back, he might be coming back as a face. Of course, the Slim Jim Battle Royal was won by LA Knight and it received positive reviews from the sponsor, so it looks like LA Knight might be getting more of a push. In the MMA rules fight between Ronda Rousey and Shayna Baszler won by referee's decision. Now, this is believed to be Ronda Rousey's last appearance in the WWE as her contract is coming up soon, and this was, I guess, her last program with the WWE. She wanted to finish up her WWE career with a program with Baszler, and this was it. The match itself was not received all that well, though. Was considered too slow and plotting for a lot of people because, again, trying to make an MMA match in a pro wrestling style is pretty difficult to begin with. Gunther retained the Intercontinental title over Drew McIntyre. Seth Rollins retained the WWE World Heavyweight title over Finn Balor. And then you had two title changes in the women's title, as in the triple threat match. Bianca Belair defeated Asuka and Charlotte Flair. And then Io Sky finally decided to cash in her Money in the Bank option and ended up beating a pretty worn down Bianca Belair in like 10 seconds. This is likely to set up a program between Sky and Belair, for the near future here. And then in the main event of the evening, Roman Reigns retained the WWE and WWE Universal titles in a tribal combat match over Jey Uso with a surprise turn by Jay's brother Jimmy. He's now going to set up, which now they're saying is going to be setting up a program between Jay and Jimmy Uso, as Roman will be taking some time off for the next few months here. And there's no plans on taking the titles off of Roman either there. So with that, moving on to some AEW news. As first up, of course, this past weekend's Collision. So they did also tape the Ring of Honor show. As I find it here. There it is. Okay, so this past weekend's Collision saw in the opening match the FTR defeat Big Bill and Brian Cage, who had earned a title shot after winning the blind eliminate. After not winning the blind eliminate, but they got a title shot here, and were defeated. Later on in the night, of course, FTR along with, I'll get to that in a moment after I go through the other matches. Chris Statlander retained the TBS title over Mercedes Martinez. After the match, of course, Mercedes, along with Diamante, attacked Chris Statlander, only for Willow Nightingale to make the save for Statlander. Samoa Joe defeated Serpentico 14 seconds. Serpentico making his Collision debut. And Samoa Joe, after the match, this match was more about setting up something between Joe and Punk, anything else, because right after the match, he called out CM Punk to challenge him for the quote unquote real world championship, the belt that CM Punk is holding on to, the belt that Punk had when he was injured, and they had to come up with a new belt in the meantime. In an open house match, the House of Black retained the trios titles over Action Andretti, Darius Martin, and Lee Johnson. Jay White defeated Metallic in just over 5 minutes, and then CM Punk retained the real world title over Ricky Starks, with some help, though, but not negative help per se, but from Special Enforcer Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. Now, after the show ended up happening, FTR. Now, of course, after the match, Ricky Starks attacked Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, only for CM Punk to make the save. And of course, FTR, after they took Ricky Steamboat to the back, FTR came out, and along with CM Punk, they paid homage to Dennis Condrey, basically one of the original members of the Midnight Express. Now, of course, as noted in their speech, FTR noted that they modeled themselves after the Condrey Eaton version of it. Now, the Midnight Express it was primarily a tag team throughout the 80s, first with Condrey and Eaton, later Eaton and Stan Lane. But even before that, Condrey was part of the original Midnight Express with ravishing Randy Rose and Norval Austin in Southeastern Territory, in the early 80s. So with that, and then of course with that, let's see what happened on Ring of Honor this past weekend. Okay. On this past week's Honor Club tapings, let's see. In a World Television Title Eliminator semifinal, Shane Taylor defeated Christopher Daniels. Aussie Open defended and retained the World Tag Team Championships over Iron Savages. Katsuyori Shibata retained the Pure title over Josh Woods of the Varsity Athletes. Let's see, anything else of note? In the other semifinal in the World Title Eliminator Tournament match, Gravity defeated Tony Nese. Gravity will be taking on Shane Taylor to see who will challenge Samoa Joe in the near future. Athena defeated Diamante in a World Women's match. And the main event saw El Hijo del Vikingo and Commander defeat the Workhorsemen. So that happened on Ring of Honor. And then on this past week's Impact Wrestling, of course, some things as Impact is, of course, preparing for Multiverse United on the 20th and Emergence on the 21st. The Coven defeated Yona Purrazzo and Trinity. Now, prior to the match, Deonna Purrazzo, or Trinity came out to make a speed. Deonna Purrazzo came out to counter it. She had mentioned to Trinity last week that she was going to fulfill her contractual rematch at Emergence, and so the Coven came out to confront the champion and former champion, noting, Kylan King noting that Trinity defeated her in her debut match on Impact Wrestling, and she wanted a shot at revenge in the tag match. Heath defeated Alan Angels in 6:17. Jake Something defeated Davey Vega in 2 minutes 33 for the Impact Digital Media title in a three-way match. Kenny King retained over Joe Hendry and Yuya Uemura. And in a number one contender tournament first round match for the Impact World Tag Team title, the Rascals found a way to slip by Mike Bailey and Jonathan Gresham. The Speedball Foundation, as we might want to call them. So, and as I was mentioning, of course, the end of the month here on the weekend of the 26th and 27th. So here's Tim plugging his stuff here. Two-thirds of the way funded. That's cool. Please let's make the Epic campaign 80% funded before the week is out. You know what is in the house, Melvin 3? Yep. That now has Melvin 0. All right. Well, be sure to catch all that, guys. And if you haven't already, if you can like and share the stream, see if we can get some more friendly people in here, that'd be appreciated. Also, if anything catches your interest, feel free to comment and or ask questions, and I will try to answer them to the best of my ability. So with that, now it's time to wind things down again, and take a look back at this day in each history. History! 1948, then 1993. All right, so with that, let's take a look back at this day in each history. First off, we're going to head back to 1948, as on this date, 75 years ago today, Hisao Tanaka would defeat Lee Grable for the NWA Hawaii title. As I recall, Hisao Tanaka would later go on to become more well known as Duke Keomuke. But on this date, 75 years ago today, he would defeat Lee Grable for the NWA Hawaii title in... Oh, I'm sorry, that was for tomorrow. Oh, boy. I was so excited I forgot. Oh, boy. Oh, poo. That was supposed to be for tomorrow. Oh, well, my mistake. That was 75 years ago tomorrow. So excited that I completely forgot about that. Anyways, we'll probably have... Anyways, moving on to the next piece of niche history here. And on this date in 1993, Production IG's Pat Labor 2, the movie, premiered in Japanese theaters on this date 30 years ago today. On this date, 30 years ago today, the Pat Labor 2, the movie, premiered in Japanese theaters. And on this date, 10 years ago today, it is tomorrow in Australia. Yeah, it probably is. It's probably also tomorrow in Japan, Rick. I'm pretty sure. Anyways, on this date in 2013, 10 years ago today, 15th issue of Earth 2 from DC went on sale on this date 10 years ago today. Sold for $2.99, 32 pages. The story was War Torn, written by James Robinson, with penciled by Nicola Scott. Trevor Scott did the inking. Desi Saintley did lettering, and then Peter Panzazis did the coloring. So with that, I thank you guys for being here tonight. I do appreciate you being here. Tomorrow night, we're going to continue the overview of Canadian comics history, looking through, starting from the New Wave period of the mid-'70s, going through the rest of it. I didn't realize it was going to be that long of an article, but we'll finish that off. I probably won't even, because of how long things went tonight, I probably won't even do the wrestling wrap-up. So maybe, which would get me thinking that if I do these special projects like this, maybe on these nights I won't do as a wrestling wrap as part of the news segment. So, anyways, coming up on an hour and a half here. So, anyways, guys, I thank you for being here. Told you about tomorrow night, and of course, this Friday we'll be doing the historical comic retrospect with Metal as my co-host. You're looking at Silver Street Comics Volume 1, Number 2 from Lev Gleason, and I hope to see you all here tomorrow, Friday, and throughout the week. So with that, I thank you all, and I bid you all adieu. Bye!